They say that love makes you do foolish things, but flying 7,000 miles across the ocean to surprise the man you love, that was supposed to be romantic. Not foolish. My name is Alisha, and as I stood inside that private, rain-drenched dining room in the heart of Gangnam, shivering in a velvet dress that suddenly felt far too loud, I realized the cruelest truth of all. Some men don't just break your heart. They erase you. Through the soft steam rising from the hot porcelain plates, I looked at Do-jin, the same Do-jin who had spent 6 months in Kenya holding my hands under the evening heat, swearing that the moment I landed in Seoul, he would present me to the world as his wife. But he wasn't looking at me. His eyes were wide with sheer, suffocating terror. And his right hand? It was tightly wrapped around the fingers of another woman, a Korean heiress named Chae-won, who was currently giggling, tilting her head, and showing off a diamond ring that caught the ambient candlelight like a spark of ice. Do-jin. My voice came out barely above a whisper, but in that silent, expensive room, it sounded like a glass vase shattering on marble. Who is she? Do-jin didn't even have the courage to stand up. He cleared his throat, pulling his hand away from hers so fast you'd think she was made of fire. He laughed, a fake, high-pitched laugh that made my stomach churn. "Oh, Alisha," he stammered, his eyes darting frantically. You actually made it. Everyone, this is Alisha. She's a girl I did some freelance design work with back in Nairobi. She must have come to Korea on vacation and thought she'd stop by. A freelance associate, a temporary acquaintance. 6 months of whispered promises, late-night phone calls, and shared dreams, swept under the rug in 6 seconds. Chae-won smirked, eyeing my fine, textured curls and radiant skin with a look of condescending pity. "A designer?" she purred, taking a slow sip of her tea. "Do-jin, darling, I didn't know your company hired overseas tourists. Tell her to leave a business card with the secretary tomorrow. We're in the middle of our family dinner." The room fell into a heavy, suffocating quiet. Do-jin looked down at his lap, cowardly, refusing to meet my eyes. I felt the heat rising behind my eyelids, the sting of betrayal burning through my chest. I opened my mouth to speak, to expose every single lie he had ever fed me. Thud. The sound of mahogany wood meeting the floor echoed through the room as a tall figure at the head of the table stood up. My breath caught in my throat. For a second, I thought it was Do-jin. The sharp jawline, the piercing eyes, the dark hair, they looked like twin brothers. But as he stepped into the light, the energy in the room shifted entirely. This man possessed a presence that Do-jin could only dream of. A quiet, terrifying authority, wrapped in a dark, tailored suit. It was Seo-jun, Do-jin's father. At 40 years old, Seo-jun looked barely a day over 30, but the cold intensity in his gaze was that of a man who had built an empire from absolute nothingness. He had been a teenage father, losing his childhood sweetheart the very day Do-jin was born, and for 24 long years, he had lived as a hermit to love, giving his entire life to his company and raising his son. And right now, Seo-jun's eyes were fixed on Do-jin with absolute coldness. "Do-jin." Seo-jun's voice was dangerously low, smooth as silk, yet loud enough to freeze the blood in his son's veins. "Is this how I raised you to treat a woman who traveled across the world to see you?" Do-jin turned pale as a sheet. "Father, it's not what you think. She misunderstands." "Silence," Seo-jun cut him off sharply, not raising his voice, but authority ringing in every word. "You gave this young woman your word, didn't you?" Do-jin couldn't answer. He just stared at the table, swallowed in shame. Chae-won's smile completely vanished, her eyes darting between father and son as she realized something deeply dishonest was going on. Seo-jun walked slowly past his trembling son, stopping directly in front of me. He looked down at my rain-soaked shoulders, then at the faint tremble in my hands. Without a single word, he reached out, unbuttoned his own heavy wool coat, and gently draped it over my shoulders. His scent, sandalwood and cold rain, instantly wrapped around me. "Miss Alisha," Seo-jun said softly, his deep voice carrying a tone of sincere, dignified apology. "My son has displayed a disgraceful lack of character tonight, but my family will not leave a guest stranded in a storm." He turned his head slightly toward Do-jin. "We will discuss your behavior later, Do-jin. All of it." Then, Seo-jun looked back at me, his dark, intense eyes holding mine for a beat too long, before he gestured toward the door. "My driver will take you to my estate's guest house for the night, so you can rest. You are safe there, and tomorrow, we will figure out your next steps. Please, step out of the cold." I had no idea then that walking through that door wasn't just me escaping the rain. It was the beginning of an unscripted, dangerous story that neither Seo-jun nor I ever saw coming. To understand how I ended up in that humiliating restaurant in Gangnam, you have to understand the web of lies Do-jin spun over 6 long months. I met Do-jin in Nairobi. He was in Kenya doing a gap-year internship with an international architectural firm, while I was building my career as an independent brand strategist and graphic designer. On paper, he was everything a woman could dream of: polite, attentive, and incredibly charming. He bought me flowers on rainy Tuesdays, sat with me in quiet coffee shops for hours while I sketched designs, and told me stories about his life in Seoul. He told me his mother died when he was just a baby, leaving his young father to raise him alone. He spoke about his father with a mix of high respect and noticeable fear. He said his father was a harsh, distant businessman who cared only about work, leaving Do-jin desperately wanting to prove he was his own man. I fell for his vulnerability. When I looked into his eyes, I saw a young man trying to find his own identity. So when his internship ended and he had to return to Korea, I didn't doubt him for a single second when he held my face at the airport and made a promise. "Come to Seoul in 2 months," he had whispered, kissing my forehead. "My father's firm is expanding its global division. I will introduce you to him, not just as our top design consultant, but as the woman I want to build my future with." I trusted those words. For 2 months, we spoke every single night. He checked my flight bookings, sent me pictures of the city, and reminded me daily of how much he missed my laughter, my dark, warm eyes, and my long, textured hair that he used to love touching. 2 days ago, I boarded a 12-hour flight from Nairobi to Incheon. I landed on a cold, gray Tuesday morning, expecting to see Do-jin standing at the arrival gate with a bouquet of yellow roses, just like he promised. Instead, I stepped off the plane into a freezing drizzle, greeted by a quiet man in a black suit holding a sign with my name on it. He introduced himself as Do-jin's personal driver. He took my bags, opened the door to a sleek silver sedan, and handed me a note written on heavy parchment. The note was in Do-jin's handwriting. "Alisha, my love, I am so sorry I couldn't meet you at the airport. An emergency came up at my father's firm, and I am tied up in meetings all day. My driver will take you to a private service apartment I booked for you. Rest up. I will see you tomorrow night for dinner." I read the note twice. A small knot of anxiety tightened in the pit of my stomach. An emergency? On the exact day I arrived? I tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted him, but the messages remained undelivered, unread. The driver dropped me off at a high-rise apartment building in a quiet part of the city. The space was beautiful, clean, and luxurious, but it felt cold, sterile, like a gilded cage designed to keep someone hidden away. That night, I barely slept. The jet lag, combined with the unsettling silence of the apartment, kept my mind racing. By the afternoon of the second day, I still hadn't heard a single word from Do-jin. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was 5 in the afternoon when I noticed his old tablet sitting on the coffee table near the window. He had left it behind during his last visit to Kenya, and it was synced to his personal cloud account. I picked it up, intending to find his assistant's contact number, but as the screen lit up, a calendar notification popped up on the display. A red-flagged event scheduled for 7 o'clock that very evening. It read, "Formal Sangyunhae engagement dinner with Chaewon and family. Location, Hansu Private Dining, Gangnam." My breathing stopped. Sangyunhae. I knew enough about Korean culture to know what that meant. It wasn't a business meeting. It was the traditional, official pre-wedding dinner where 2 elite families meet to finalize a marriage alliance. My hands began to shake. I tapped on the notification details. Attached to the entry was an image of a digital invitation. There was Do-jin's face, smiling next to a fair-skinned, perfectly polished young woman named Chaewon. The date of the event was set for tonight. A cold wave of shock rushed through my veins, quickly followed by a burning, furious clarity. He hadn't hidden me away because he was busy with work. He had stashed me in an apartment across town so I wouldn't disrupt his grand arrangement. He was planning to play the dutiful fiancé to a rich heiress while keeping me as a quiet secret on the side. I looked at my reflection in the dark window of the apartment. I saw a strong African woman who had worked too hard for her dignity to ever let a coward treat her like an afterthought. I didn't cry. I didn't pack my bags to run back to the airport. Instead, I opened my luggage, pulled out an elegant emerald velvet dress, styled my soft curls with meticulous care, and ordered a taxi directly to Gangnam. When I stepped into the torrential downpour outside the restaurant, my heart was pounding, but my mind was completely steady. I walked past the nervous hostesses, pushed open the sliding wooden door of the private room, and stepped right into his lie. Which brings us back to that very moment. Now, as the heavy black sedan belonging to Do-jin's father, Seo-jun, pulled through the massive stone gates of a traditional-style estate on the outskirts of Seoul, I sat in the back seat, wrapped in Seo-jun's heavy wool coat. The engine quieted down. The driver stepped out to open my door, holding a wide umbrella over my head. I stepped onto the wet gravel pathway and looked up at the stunning house ahead. Through the glass double doors of the entrance stood Seo-jun. He had arrived minutes before us in his own car. He had stripped off his suit jacket, wearing only a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong, lean forearms. He looked incredibly young, yet the intense, controlled look in his eyes made him seem larger than life. He didn't speak as I walked up the stone steps. He simply stepped aside to let me into the warm, wooden-accented foyer. "You are safe here, Miss Alisha," Seo-jun said, his deep voice filling the quiet hall. "No one will bother you tonight. My staff has prepared the guest suite on the east wing." "Why are you doing this?" I asked, turning to face him, my voice still carrying the raw edge of betrayal. "You don't know me. I am the woman your son tried to hide." Seo-jun stood silent for a long moment. He looked into my eyes, his dark gaze tracing the fine features of my face, the subtle brown of my skin, and the posture I held despite everything I had just suffered. "I am doing this because my son made a catastrophic mistake," Seo-jun said, his voice dropping an octave. "And because a woman like you should never have been made to feel small." Before I could process the strange, heavy tension rising in the air between us, the loud sound of tires screeching outside cut through the night air. Do-jin had followed us to the estate. The heavy wooden front doors burst open, letting in a bitter gust of wind and rain. Do-jin stood on the threshold, breathless, his dark hair plastered to his forehead and his designer suit soaked. His eyes scanned the warm foyer, landing first on me, wrapped in his father's coat, and then on Seo-jun, who hadn't even flinched at the intrusion. "Father!" Do-jin yelled, his voice cracking with a mixture of anger and desperate panic. "What are you doing? Why did you bring her here? Do you have any idea what you just did back at the restaurant?" Seo-jun slowly turned around. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move an inch. The sheer stillness of his posture was far more terrifying than any scream. "I am standing in my own home, Do-jin," Seo-jun said, his tone icy and measured. "The real question is why you are shouting like an undisciplined child in front of a guest." "A guest?" Do-jin took a restive step forward, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She isn't a guest. She's an international distraction. Chaewon's father is furious. They are threatening to pull their family's logistics contract from our firm by tomorrow morning. Do you realize how many millions that contract is worth?" I took a step back, feeling the fresh sting of his words. To Do-jin, I wasn't a human being he had loved. I was a financial liability, a glitch in his carefully crafted ascent up the corporate ladder. Seo-jun's eyes narrowed into dark slits. The atmosphere in the hallway plummeted below freezing. "Is that what she was to you?" Seo-jun asked softly, stepping slightly in front of me, placing his body as a barrier between Do-jin's rage and my space. "A transaction? You flew to Kenya, lied to a woman of character, brought her across the world, and locked her in an apartment like a piece of baggage you were ashamed to carry?" "You don't understand how the world works, father," Do-jin sneered, his frustration boiling over. You've been hiding in this house for 24 years. You built your firm through hard labor and sacrifice. But this is the real world now. Alliances are made through marriage. Chaewon's family gives us power. And what does Alisha give you? Seo-jun countered instantly, his voice ringing with absolute authority. She gave you her trust. She gave you her time, and you spat on it to buy a title you haven't earned. Do-jin laughed bitterly, running a hand through his wet hair. You're judging me? You? You became a father at 16. You ruined your youth. Mom died giving birth to me, and you spent the last 2 decades acting like a martyr, avoiding every woman who ever looked your way. You don't know anything about love or ambition, father. You just know duty. The silence that followed was deafening. For a fraction of a second, I saw a flash of raw, ancient pain flicker across Seo-jun's sharp features. He had sacrificed his entire youth, his entire personal life, to raise the boy standing in front of him. He had never married. He had never allowed another woman into his heart after losing his teenage love. He had lived as a hermit to romance for 24 years, pouring every ounce of his soul into protecting Do-jin. And this was how his son repaid him. Seo-jun took 3 slow steps toward Do-jin. The air was so tense I could hear the rain dripping off Do-jin's coat onto the hardwood floor. You are right about one thing, Do-jin, Seo-jun said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. I lived for duty. I gave up my youth so you would never feel the burden of being in mistake. But tonight, I see the result of my leniency. Seo-jun stood chest to chest with his son. Looking at them side by side, the resemblance was undeniable. The same striking jawline, the same sharp eyes. But where Do-jin looked fragile and small, Seo-jun looked like an unshakable mountain. Effective immediately, Seo-jun announced. You are suspended from your position at the firm. Your corporate accounts are frozen, and your access to the family trust is revoked. Do-jin's eyes went wide with sheer horror. You can't do that over some foreign girl. I am doing it because you lack honor, Seo-jun replied coldly. If you want to marry Chaewon for her family's money, go ahead, but you will do it on your own dime. You will not use my name, my reputation, or my money to finance your cowardice. Do-jin stood frozen, realization hitting him like a physical blow. He looked past his father, locking eyes with me. For the first time that night, I saw regret in his eyes, not because he missed me, but because he realized he had lost everything in a single hour. Alisha, Do-jin stammered, stepping toward me. Tell him you're leaving. You're going back to Nairobi, right? Just tell him to stop this. I stood tall, pulling Seo-jun's warm wool coat tighter around my shoulders. I looked Do-jin straight in the eye, my voice steady, smooth, and laced with absolute certainty. I came to Korea because I thought you were a man, Do-jin, I said, my voice echoing in the grand hall. I see now that I was mistaken. I will decide when I leave, but I will never, ever let you make me feel small again. Do-jin opened his mouth to speak, but Seo-jun raised his hand, pointing firmly toward the open rain outside. Get out of my house, Seo-jun commanded. With his fists clenched in helpless rage, Do-jin turned on his heel and stormed back out into the pouring rain, slamming the heavy wooden door behind him. The silence returned to the estate, heavy and profound. I stood in the center of the foyer, my heart pounding against my ribs, the sheer adrenaline of the confrontation slowly wearing off. I felt small again, exhausted from the flight, the betrayal, and the chaos. Seo-jun turned back to me. The harsh, terrifying authority in his face vanished, replaced by a deep, quiet softness. He walked over, his eyes searching my face with genuine concern. I apologize that you had to witness that, Miss Alisha, he said, his deep voice wrapping around me like a blanket. My housekeeper has prepared the guest house. It is quiet, warm, and private. Please, rest. I looked up into his dark, intense eyes. At 40 years old, he had the face of a young prince, but the soul of a king. Thank you, Mr. Seo-jun, I whispered. Call me Seo-jun, he replied softly, his hand lingering near mine for a second too long, before he stepped back to let the housekeeper lead me away. As I walked down the dim, wooden corridor to the guest wing, I felt a strange warmth bloom in my chest. a spark of something I couldn't yet name, lit by the very man who was supposed to be my enemy's father. The next 3 days at the estate felt like stepping into an entirely different world. Seo-jun's residence was tucked away in the quiet hills of Songbuk-dong, surrounded by tall pine trees and stone walls that blocked out the noisy bustle of Seoul. It was an architectural masterwork, traditional wooden pillars seamlessly blended with modern floor-to-ceiling glass panels. I had intended to stay for just 24 hours, pack my bags, and take the first flight back to Nairobi, but my pride wouldn't let me run away like a defeated shadow. Besides, my international design firm had remote projects I could manage from anywhere, so I settled into the quiet serenity of the guest house. And then, there was Seo-jun. For 24 years, Seo-jun had lived like a monk, dedicated entirely to his work and raising his son. He was a man of strict routine, rising before dawn, drinking traditional black tea, and spending hours in his modern courtyard studio, sketching structural blueprints. But my presence slowly cracked open the quiet solitude he had built around himself. It started on my second morning. I was sitting on the wooden veranda overlooking the inner courtyard, my laptop open, deeply focused on redesigning a luxury resort brand concept. My natural hair was picked out into a soft, beautiful halo around my head, and I wore a simple cream-colored sweater that contrasted rich against my glowing skin. "The shadow composition on that logo is off," a deep voice spoke from behind me. I turned my head to see Seo-jun standing in the doorway. He held 2 ceramic cups of steaming tea, dressed casually in a fine gray cashmere sweater. Without his crisp corporate suits, he looked absurdly youthful, his jawline sharp, his dark eyes clear and intense. "Excuse me?" I smiled faintly, tilting my laptop screen toward him. "Are you critiquing my design, Seo-jun?" He walked over, his tall frame looming over me, before he crouched down beside my low wooden table, placing a cup of tea near my hand. He smelled faintly of fresh pine, expensive tobacco, and sandalwood. "I am an architect, Alisha," he said, his voice smooth and dangerously low as he looked at my screen. "I spend my life studying symmetry and balance. Your left graphic element is suffocating the focal point. Bring it 2 millimeters to the right, and the entire piece will breathe." I blinked, looking back at my screen. I made the slight adjustment, and the design instantly transformed from good to perfection. I looked back at him, genuinely impressed. "You have a good eye." "I have an eye for rare beauty," Seo-jun replied softly. He wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at me. His dark, piercing eyes held mine with a quiet intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. For a second, the rest of the world vanished. There was no betrayal, no Do-jin, no rain, just the quiet warmth of the courtyard and a man who made my heart race with a single look. Over the next 2 days, the unspoken tension between us grew like a wild flame. We shared late-night teas in the courtyard, talking for hours about art, culture, and our pasts. I learned how young he was when he lost his childhood sweetheart, how he swore off love to protect his broken heart, and how he had carried the weight of the world on his shoulders alone. And Seo-jun looked at me with an intense, fierce admiration I had never experienced with Do-jin. He didn't just notice my looks, he respected my mind, listened to my ideas, and looked at my textured hair and radiant skin as if I were a work of art he had waited a lifetime to discover. The spark between us was no longer a hidden secret, it was a blazing fire. On the 4th evening, the fragile peace shattered. I was sitting in the main estate living room with Seo-jun, reviewing a portfolio of traditional Korean patterns. The air was warm and quiet, until the front doors were slammed open with violently loud force. Do-jin stumbled into the living room. He looked terrible, his hair was messy, his eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled faintly of alcohol. Since his suspension, Chaewon's family had put their engagement on hold, realizing Do-jin was currently cut off from his father's vast fortune. Desperate and spiraling, Do-jin had come home to beg. But as he walked into the warm living room and saw us, he froze. Seo-jun was sitting on the low sofa, leaning in close to me, his hand resting on the back of my chair, inches from my shoulder. My laughter from a joke Seo-jun had just made was still hanging in the air. Do-jin's face twisted into an expression of sheer, ugly rage. The bitter envy in his eyes was blinding. Looking at his father, a man who looked young enough to be his elder brother, a man who possessed power, discipline, and respect, Do-jin saw everything he was failing to be. And now, his father had the attention of the woman Do-jin had tossed away. "What is this?" Do-jin sneered, his voice trembling with bitter jealousy. "What the hell is this?" Seo-jun didn't move. He calmly placed his teacup down, his eyes turning to ice. "Do-jin, you are drunk. Leave." "I knew it!" Do-jin yelled, pointing a shaking finger at us. "I knew there was a reason you took her side. I thought you were playing the honorable patriarch, father. I thought you were protecting the family dignity." Do-jin took 3 unsteady steps closer, laughing maniacally. "You've been a monk for 24 years. Do-jin spat out, his voice venomous and loud enough to echo off the high ceilings. "You swore off women your whole life, and now you're picking up my trash? You really took my vomit." The disgusting, foul words hung in the air like poison. My breath hitched. The disrespect, the vile nature of his words made my blood run cold. I stood up, ready to put Do-jin in his place once and for all. Smack. The sound echoed through the entire estate like a gunshot. Before I could even blink, Seo-jun had crossed the room. His hand had struck Do-jin across the face with terrifying speed and power. Do-jin stumbled backward, hitting the wall, clutching his burning cheek in total shock. Seo-jun stood over his son, his chest rising and falling, his hands clenched into tight fists. The aura surrounding Seo-jun was no longer that of a calm businessman. It was the lethal, protective fury of a dragon. "Do not ever," Seo-jun's voice vibrated with a dark, deadly quietness. "Speak her name with your filthy mouth again." Do-jin stared at his father, utterly terrified by the raw passion and protective anger in Seo-jun's eyes. Seo-jun stepped into Do-jin's personal space, lowering his voice so only Do-jin could hear the cold truth. "She was never yours to begin with, Do-jin," Seo-jun said, every word hitting like a blade. "Because a boy like you does not know how to treasure a real woman. You called her leftovers? No, she is a treasure you were too blind and too weak to hold." Seo-jun grabbed Do-jin by his collar, dragging him toward the front entrance without an ounce of struggle, and threw him out onto the cold stone steps outside. "If you ever step foot on this property again," Seo-jun warned, staring down at his bruised son, "you will not just lose your job, you will lose your name." Seo-jun slammed the massive wooden doors shut, locking out the night. Silence returned, heavy, suffocating, electric. Seo-jun stood by the door, his back to me, taking deep, steady breaths to calm his rage. Slowly, he turned around. He walked back toward me, stopping just inches away. His eyes were dark, burning with an intense, raw emotion he could no longer hide. "Alisha," he whispered, his voice deep and slightly raspy. "I am sorry you had to hear those vile words." "Seo-jun," I breathed, looking up into his face. My heart was beating like a war drum in my chest. Without thinking, I reached out my hand and gently touched his cheek, tracing the firm line of his jaw. Seo-jun closed his eyes for a split second, leaning into my touch as if he had been starving for it his entire life. When he opened his eyes, the restraint was gone. He reached up, his large, warm hand covering mine, pressing it tighter against his face. "I didn't bring you here out of pity, Alisha," Seo-jun said, his voice thick with unspoken truth. "And God help me, I don't look at you as my son's past. I look at you, and I see my entire future." Before I could answer, the heavy silence of the night was broken by the sharp ring of Seo-jun's personal phone. He looked at the screen, his brow furrowing. It was an official press invitation to the annual Korea Architectural Heritage Gala, taking place tomorrow night. And attached was a message from the board of directors. Chaewon's family and Do-jin will be attending to publicly salvage their reputations. Seo-jun looked up from the screen, his dark eyes locking onto mine with a dangerous, thrilling smirk. "Alisha," he said softly, "will you do me the honor of being my date tomorrow night?" The morning of the gala, the atmosphere in the estate was electric. I knew that accepting Seo-jun's invitation meant stepping directly into a lion's den. High society in Seoul was notoriously ruthless, and Chaewon's family, along with a desperate Do-jin, were counting on using tonight's event to salvage their public image. They expected me to be hiding in a dark room somewhere, broken and defeated. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I spent the afternoon preparing with a quiet, fierce focus. I selected an emerald green silk gown that clung flawlessly to my form, its deep earth tone complementing my fair, radiant skin. I didn't try to hide my heritage to fit into their standards. Instead, I leaned into my absolute power. My soft, textured hair was styled into an exquisite, elevated crown, framed by delicate gold jewelry that caught the light with every subtle movement. When I walked down the grand mahogany staircase of the main house, Seo-jun was waiting at the bottom. He was dressed in a tailored black tuxedo that highlighted his broad shoulders and commanding frame, but the moment his dark eyes met mine, the quiet composure he was famous for completely vanished. He froze, his breath hitching in his chest. He walked slowly to the edge of the stairs, reaching out his hand. When my fingers rested in his warm palm, he leaned down and softly brushed his lips against the back of my hand. "You look breathtaking, Alisha," he whispered, his deep voice thick with undeniable devotion. "Tonight, the world will see what true beauty looks like." 20 minutes later, our black sedan pulled up to the grand entrance of the Seoul Cultural Arts Center. Paparazzi flashes blinded the rain-slicked pavement, and high society elite filed into the illuminated glass doors. As the valet opened my door, Seo-jun stepped out first. He extended his arm to me, and as I placed my hand on his velvet sleeve, we walked into the grand ballroom together. The room was massive, filled with crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, and hundreds of powerful executives. But the moment Seo-jun and I stepped through the main doors, a sudden, heavy hush fell over the crowd. Whispers rippled through the room like wildfire. Cameras began to flash rapidly. An elite Korean business tycoon walking arm in arm with a stunning African woman whose presence commanded the entire room was a sight no one had prepared for. Across the room, standing near a towering ice sculpture, were Do-jin, Chaewon, and her wealthy parents. Do-jin looked visibly worn out, holding a glass of scotch with a trembling hand. When his eyes landed on me, his jaw dropped, and his glass almost slipped from his fingers. He stared at my hair, my dress, and the radiant confidence radiating from my face, and I saw the sudden, sickening wave of regret wash over him. He realized in an instant that the woman he had tried to stash away like trash was outshining every single heiress in that ballroom. Chaewon's face turned bright red with pure humiliation, her hands clenching into fists as guests began pointing and whispering in their direction. Before Do-jin could stop himself, the alcohol and bitter jealousy took complete control. He set his glass down, pushed past Chaewon's furious father, and marched straight toward us through the center of the ballroom. "Alisha!" Do-jin shouted, his voice echoing over the classical string quartet. The music faltered, the crowd parted, sensing the impending disaster. Do-jin stopped 3 feet away from us, his eyes wildly darting between me and his father. He completely ignored Seo-jun, stepping forward to reach for my wrist. "Alisha, please," Do-jin pleaded, his voice cracking with desperate, pathetic urgency. "You have to stop this crazy game. I know you're just doing this to get back at me. I know I messed up, okay? Chaewon means nothing to me. It was just an arrangement my mother's family pushed on me. Come back with me. We can leave Korea tonight. We can go back to Kenya." I didn't flinch. I didn't move away. I simply looked down at his trembling hand, then up into his frantic eyes with a cold, calm pity that hurt worse than a slap. "Do-jin," I said, my voice smooth, clear, and ringing effortlessly through the quiet hall. "You didn't just mess up. You proved who you really were, when you thought no one was watching. I didn't come to this gala to get revenge on a boy. I came here on the arm of a real man." The crowd gasped. Chaewon let out a sharp, humiliated cry from the sidelines. Do-jin's face paled. He looked at his father, his eyes burning with toxic rage. "Father, you're letting her humiliate us. Tell them this is a mistake. You're my father." Seo-jun slowly stepped forward, placing himself between Do-jin and me. He stood tall, looking down at his son with an absolute, unshakable finality. He didn't raise his voice, but every word he spoke was carried perfectly across the silent ballroom. "I was your father when I sacrificed my youth to raise you, Do-jin," Seo-jun said, his voice deep and echoing with thunderous authority. "I was your father when I built a company for your future. But tonight, I am a man protecting the woman I honor." As Seo-jun turned slightly, gently wrapping his arm around my waist and pulling me securely against his side. The warmth of his body seeped through my silk dress, solidifying our bond in front of every camera and high society family in Seoul. Seo-jun looked directly into the lenses of the surrounding press photographers. "Let me make this clear to everyone in this room," Seo-jun announced calmly. "Miss Alisha is not a guest, nor is she an associate. She is my partner, my equal, and the only woman who holds my heart. Anyone who disrespects her, disrespects me, and my firm." Flashbulbs exploded instantly, cementing the moment forever. Do-jin stood frozen, utter ruin written across his face. Chaewon's father stepped up, grabbed Do-jin by the shoulder, and violently dragged him away from the press, officially severing their family alliance and ending Do-jin's corporate dreams right there on the polished marble floor. Seo-jun didn't watch them leave. He turned his head, looking down into my eyes with a soft, breathtaking smile that was meant only for me. "Shall we take a walk in the garden, my love?" he whispered softly. I smiled back, placing my hand over his chest, feeling his steady, calm heart beating beneath his suit. "Lead the way, Seo-jun." 6 months passed, and the quiet dust settled over Seoul. The downfall of Do-jin was swift, but it was fair. Stripped of his executive title and cut off from the family trust, he was forced to step down into an entry-level position at a regional firm far outside the capital. Without his father's backing or the illusion of wealth, Chaewon's family cut ties with him completely. For the first time in his life, Do-jin was forced to learn the hard way what his father had known all along. That true respect is not inherited, nor can it be bought with a ring. It has to be earned through character, humility, and labor. As for Seo-jun and me, our story didn't end in that sparkling ballroom in Gangnam. That night was simply the threshold we crossed together. 6 months later, the cold Seoul rain was replaced by the warm golden light of the afternoon sun over the hills of Nairobi. We were sitting on the wide veranda of my family's home, overlooking the valley. The breeze carried the scent of sweet acacia trees and fresh earth. Beside me, Seo-jun sat in a simple linen shirt, his sleeves rolled up, looking entirely at peace. He had taken a month off from his firm, something his executives swore he had never done in 24 years, just to accompany me home, to meet my family, and to understand the roots of the woman who had captivated his life. "You look far too relaxed for a CEO, Seo-jun," I teased softly, resting my hand on the table next to his. Seo-jun turned his head, his dark, expressive eyes locking onto mine with that same intense, quiet warmth that had swept me off my feet from the start. He reached across the table, sliding his fingers through mine, his thumb gently tracing the back of my hand. "I spent 24 years running, Alisha," he said, his deep voice carrying a quiet reverence. "Building walls, guarding my heart, living only for work and duty, because I thought love was a tragic memory from my youth. I thought my story was already finished." He raised my hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against my knuckles. "I didn't realize my life was just waiting for you to walk through my door," he whispered softly. "You gave me back my heart, Alisha." I looked into his eyes, feeling a deep, unshakable peace settle over my soul. There was no shadow of the past here, no bitterness, no insecurity, and no hidden agendas. What we built wasn't born out of revenge against a boy who didn't know better. It was forged in genuine respect, shared intellect, and an undeniable passion between two mature souls. My former fiancé thought he was bringing me to Korea to play a quiet, hidden side character in his petty world. He thought his father took his leftovers. He never understood that a boy only sees the surface, while a real man recognizes true value. His young, principled father didn't take my past. He stepped in to claim my future. And as Seo-jun pulled me close under the warm African sky, his lips softly meeting mine, I knew with complete certainty that I was exactly where I belonged.